chapter 17. We just left off in the previous chapter where the Lord is telling them, remember these feasts that I'm telling you about, telling this new generation before they enter into the promised land, of course. But now we're moving on into these sacrifices. Thou shalt not sacrifice unto the Lord thy God any bullock or sheep wherein is blemish, or any ill-favoredness, for that is an abomination unto the Lord thy God. So the importance of a pure sacrifice is here noticed, one without blemish. The only time in history when the sacrifice of imperfect creatures is complained of to any great extent is the time of the prophet Malachi, at the very end of the Old Testament. The laxity of the priest in his time called forth the prophecy that in every place incense should be offered to God's name and a pure offering, which is of no surprise, considering that the 400 years of no prophets that we're told of were ever sent unto the Jewish people at that time until John Baptist arrived in the New Testament. So even their sacrifices, it is believed, were polluted then. Verse 2, If there be found among you within any of thy gates which the Lord thy God giveth thee, man or woman, that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of the Lord thy God, in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and served other gods, and worshipped them, either the sun, or moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee, and thou hast heard of it, and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true, and the thing certain, that such an abomination is wrought in Israel, then shalt thou bring forth that man or that woman which have committed that wicked thing unto thy gates, even that man or that woman, and shalt stone them with stones till they die. Now catch this. A very known clause added to their guilty verdict being rendered unto them before their death. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. This is very important. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death. That is incredibly important. The hands of the witnesses, these 2 or 3, or however, the hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. It was at this point yesterday, whenever I was studying this part of the chapter, that I marveled at his ability to ensure that justice is done in even a very fallen, evil world. Because right here, he says, if 2 or 3 people were to come against me for something and accuse me of something worthy of death, and they bring me before all the people, they accuse me, and then the verdict is, okay, you must die. Well, the ones in whom must cast the first stones at me are those in whom accused me. Now that means that if they were lying about me and giving false witness against me, then my blood would be upon their hands whenever they stand before the Lord in the afterlife. This is very important. This should invoke great fear in all the people in whom heard about this certain ordinance being given out. If there arise a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, between stroke and stroke, between matters of controversy within thy gates, then shalt thou arise and get thee up into the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. If there's this case that comes before you in which you're having a great difficulty with, and thou shalt come unto the priests, the Levites, and unto the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire, and they shall show thee the sentence of judgment. And thou shalt do according to the sentence which they of that place which the Lord shall choose shall show thee. And thou shalt observe to do according to all that they inform thee, according to the sentence of the law which they shall teach thee, and according to the judgment which they shall tell thee, thou shalt do. Now that's referring to the Urim and Thummim, the 3 stones within the high priest's breastplate. A yes or no question was asked, probably whether is this person guilty or not, or did they do this or not, or whatever. It had to have been a yes or a no, and the high priest, he would reach in, and it's presumed that there would be yes and no written upon the Thummim Thummim plural, meaning more than one. But there would be a yes and no on this, and then the Urim would be the signifier that whichever rock that you pulled out was correct. So if you reach in, you have to pull the Urim out every time, but you have to pick one of these two similar shaped rocks and pull them out. And if it's yes, if it lights up and it's believed that this Urim would be illuminated, if the answer was correct, and if it wasn't, then of course it wouldn't be. So it would obviously be the other. But anyway, the case would be brought before these priests. The priests would go to the law, and they would tell them what's written in the law. Then they'd go to the Urim and Thummim. A lot of steps to take right here to make sure that the proper verdict was rendered. Thou shalt not decline from the sentence which they shall show thee to the right hand nor to the left. And the man that will do presumptuously and will not hearken unto the priest that standeth to minister there before the Lord thy God, or unto the judge, even that man shall die, and thou shalt put away the evil from Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear and do no more presumptuously. Meaning of your own mind, of your own fancies, of your own thoughts, letting them guide you instead of that in which the fear of the Lord would rather. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. Adam Clarke noted that it was on the ground of this command that the Jews proposed that insidious question to our Lord whenever they said, is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar? Whenever they tried to trap him with questions. Because remember, in the time of Christ, Rome was ruling over the land of Israel. So the Romans were very despised, and their governance very despised among the Jews. They didn't like being ruled over by Gentiles, especially those Gentiles. So they're asking, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or no? Should we give him any of our taxes or anything? For they were then under the authority of a foreign power. Had Christ said yes, then they would have condemned him by this law, because then he would have been seemingly agreeing with a foreigner ruling over the Jews and going against this command. Had he said no, then they would have accused him to Caesar and said that he was an insurrectionist trying to rile up the people. But what did Christ say? He replies, bring me a coin. So they bring him a coin, and he says, whose face is on here? Julius Caesar's. And render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and render unto God the things which are God's. Can you imagine trying to outwit the creator of everything? That's absolutely impossible. They never could get him to stumble on anything. And no telling how long that they thought about these tough scenarios to try to trip him up in, and in just a moment he answers back something that never even came into any of their minds. The wisest men in the land, supposedly. But he shall not, speaking of this king in whom they'd set up over themselves, now here's some laws for him. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. Once again, laws are here given for the prince that should be elected. He must carefully avoid everything that would turn him from God and religion. Everything. Riches, honors, pleasures are three great hindrances of godliness: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life, especially to those in high stations. Against these the king is here warned. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. King Solomon went against every single bit of these commands. The richest man in the whole world had the most wives that anyone has ever had, and he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and then it speaks of his horses, Solomon's horses. And so he absolute, and then he fell into idolatry. Can you imagine going from King David to the greatest potential king of anywhere, that being of Solomon, the wisest man in the whole world, and suddenly he falls so hard. The higher the rise, the greater the fall. And it shall be, when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book, out of that which is before the priests the Levites. I'm assuming that one of the benefits of that would have been fresh copies constantly being written for all different reigns, to keep it fresh and going and on the mind of everybody. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes to do them. And, that really gets me to thinking about, back then they didn't have printers like we do. Today we can just print off everything. We got printers at our homes. We can just print off any kind of work that we desire. But there are huge industrial printing companies in which can pump out book after book after book. Back then, everything had to be handwritten. So it is really astounding and a great proof of God that such ancient words, as we're reading even right here, some 3,500 years old. That's astounding, That really is amazing. We're reading these 3,500 years later. And it's great proof that God has passed this knowledge down to us, and he has preserved this knowledge so that we can easily read it even into the last days, because heaven and earth shall pass away, but the word of God shall stand forever. But the king, he is to study the law, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment, to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. That's very important right here. Don't even lift up your heart above any. Don't think that you're any more special than anyone else. You just be part of the common people, part of the common man. That's the great heart of a great king, is to be humble. We must not forget that the true king of Israel is he whose special mission it was to fulfill the law and the prophets. We're told about how these others are to study and to learn the law, these other kings, but this king would come and fulfill it. They were unable to fulfill it. Every man is a breaker of the whole law. If you break one, then you broke them all. But Christ actually was a king in whom came and fulfilled the law and the prophets, the books of the prophets. As it says of him, Lo, I come, in the volume of the book it is written of me. I delight to do thy will, O my God. Yea, thy law is within my heart. I believe it also very worthy of note, my friends, in order to strengthen your faith, that the only dynasty was that of David's, in whom continued on, and is still promised through Christ to reign forever. No dynasty except that of David ever continued for more than 5 generations. Only David's lineage persisted until the time of the Babylonian captivity. Now it's to be reinvigorated at the time of Christ at the second coming, whenever he establishes his millennial reign and he takes the throne of David. As one can see over here, all these different kings from all these different places and families and all of this, all of them fell apart. Jehu was one of the only few in whom actually had a decent reign of descendants, and that's because of what he did to Jezebel and Ahab, and he put away Baal for a time, for the most part. But on over here to the left, all David's descendants, every one of them. And Christ was going to come through that line. So we can tell the God of heaven is preserving them, obviously, because look at what happens whenever earthly men in whom disobey and fall away from God, how they're just all muddled up and everything gets lost, and it's a train wreck. But over here, you've still got David's descendants, all kings.